For the last 3 years, I've been travelling the world to discover and tell the incredible story of how beer built and changed the world. From the dusty dunes of the Egyptian desert to the frozen wilderness of Arctic Svalbard, as well as more likely places like Munich's beer halls and St. Louis's beer cathedrals. I've come to believe that the creation of beer and wider fermentation is as important to human development as the discovery of fire. The list of achievements made in the pursuit of better beer is mind-bending. We invented refrigeration to keep lager cellars cool, adopted pasteurisation to keep beer fresh, and laid railways to take it places quicker. Beer has inspired some other great discoveries, including germ theory of disease, and brewer's yeast is now used to create vaccines, insulin, and even biofuels. All along, breweries have sponsored sports and TV, funded political parties, and influenced cultures and cuisines. All these stories and many more are told in my new book, The Meaning of Beer, out on the 7th of November 2024. Buy your copy today, right after you watch this week's episode inspired by one of the chapters. So Bradley, on this table, I'm going to make the argument in this episode that we have, if not the most important beer ever brewed, certainly the most important brewery ever to have existed.
Come on.
So this particular beer would have been invented about 50 years after all the shit went down. But the brewery itself, I think, has had a bigger impact on brewing and indeed the wider world than perhaps any other. Slight argument for Carlsberg, maybe an argument for Hofbräuhaus. But this is Spaten.
Spaten.
And I make that joke, don't worry, this is Sparta joke in the book, you'll be fine. Should we taste it first?
I love a beer, Jonny.
Let's taste a bit of history.
Especially such a monumental beer.
Indeed.
Building it up here.
Well, I hope you agree at the end of this, this episode. So Spaten, to add to the mystery of this brand, is very, very old. Back to the 14th century we can trace this brewery.
Sounds like 13 something.
Yeah, 13, wow. Oh gosh, 1397 or something, it is in the book.
That is crazy old.
So it's a super old brewery, but we don't actually know that much about it until 1807, when a man called Gabriel Sedelmeier buys this brewery. And at the time, Spaten was the smallest brewery of 52 in Munich.
Right.
But Gabriel Sedelmeier, he was not a small man. He was a former brewmaster at Hofbräuhaus, which was, well, still was at the time, owned by the Bavarian royal family.
Yes.
One of the most loved and championed and exciting breweries sort of in the world at the time. So he goes off and he buys a new brewery. And this brewery did not have a particularly great reputation for its beer, hence the smallest in Munich. Let's taste it, see where they ended up. Honey, grain, lemon.
It's a lovely fresh fragrance off the old Spaten.
Yeah.
Crisp, clean,
grainy.
For
a Helles, not that sweet. Like Paulaner is a bit sweeter. Augustina we know is a bit more sulphury and funky. This is sort of the epitome of what a Helles is and should be, even if it's not your favourite.
A little bit drier.
A little bit drier, yeah. And this is the original Helles. So Spaten invented the Helles that everybody then copied around Munich and increasingly around the world. But actually, we're going to talk about 50 years earlier when they made some significantly bigger inventions than just the Helles. So the last time we drank this beer, you and I were on the top floor of the Spaten brewery in Munich, weren't we?
Yeah, I like to call it Nakatomi Tower because it had a very 80s die-hard look to the boardroom that we were in.
It did. We were early to the party. There was only one other person there.
yeah.
But yeah, and I mean, Die Hard is an incredible story, but I'd argue that this might just about outdo it.
Damn.
So we were there with a wonderful guys, like a history buff and a tour guide for Spaten. Spaten's a bit of a mothball brand now, which is a real shame because of the story I'm about to tell. But the beer is still good, and the history is incredible. So we've met Gabriel Sedelmeier, 1807. He actually manages to grow this brewery, making dark lagers at the time, as pretty much all lager breweries were. He grows it to about the 6th biggest just through improving the quality, through being a great brewer.
Wow.
That takes about a decade. But in those 10 years, he does something significantly more important, which is he has a son.
Right.
Who, helpfully for us, he calls Gabriel Sedelmeier. So we're going to call him Gabriel Jr.
Okay.
And this is really the man who changes the world. So he's going to be a brewer. He's going to take over Spaten when his dad pops his clogs.
Yes.
And what his dad does is he sends him for a master diploma in brewing. And as part of that, he travels around Europe, learning all the different brewing cultures around Europe. And he does this with his best gap year friend,
Right.
Anton Dreher,
Yeah.
of Spaten brewery in Vienna. We've actually got a video where we went hunting for the original Vienna lager. And together they travel Europe and they learn lots of things, but the most important stuff happens in the UK, here. In fact, in London, quite a lot of it, because they discover brewing culture and brewing technology, which was way, way, way ahead of everybody else in the world, because we had such a big market to sell to and such big breweries thanks to
Industrial Revolution. Empire.
Empire, that's the one, yeah. So we had markets all over the world we could sell to. We were sending IPA and porter to India in great quantities, to the Baltics, sending our porters and our Burton ales. So we were way ahead of Germany at the time in terms of the size of our breweries and the technology they were using. Hey Big Geeks, this is just a quick paid advertisement from BetterHelp. If you're a long-time subscriber to our channel or our podcast, you'll know how open Brad and I are about our mental health. With a passion like ours, it's super important to know that you're drinking for the right reasons, for the flavours, for the experiences, for the social cohesion, and for the relaxation that it can bring. And it's so easy for drinking to go from a joyful and positive pastime to something that actually starts to bring you down and harms your mental and physical well-being. Now, I've used therapy a couple of times in my life, and finding someone you can trust, open up to, and get helpful feedback from isn't always easy. On top of that, with such busy lives, putting the time aside for weekly sessions can be tricky, and that's where BetterHelp come in. BetterHelp connects you with a credentialed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. Better yet, after answering a few questions, BetterHelp will connect you with a therapist who's trained to talk about the topics that you want to get off your chest. And you can conduct your session by phone, video call, or even messaging, whatever's most comfortable. It's the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist, and you can use our link, betterhelp.com/craftbeerchannel. Now back to the video, love and beer. So some of the technology that we had that the Germans didn't was the thermometer.
It didn't have a thermometer.
Well, Germany had them, but nobody in the breweries had gone,
tried
that
it.
could be handy. So while touring the British breweries, Dreher and Gabriel Jr. learned about that. We also had the hydrometer, so we knew exactly how much sugar we were getting out of our beer. We could, play with our mashes and get the most efficient mashes. That was actually invented for tax reasons, so that the government could tax us better. But in the end, it was probably good for the brewers. Yeah, exactly. But the most important thing that they learned while they were over there was how to kiln their malts properly. So since the 17th century, since the mid-1600s, we had learned that instead of kilning our malts over open fire, which got it tinged with smoke, it burnt a load of the malt, it wasn't very reliable or efficient, we could basically light a fire and then blow the hot air over it. And that would reduce the smoky flavour and get an even heat.
Yeah.
Which is actually the principle behind the fan oven. So in some ways, brewers of the UK invented the fan oven. But you could use it for drying linen, you could use it for baking, roasting, and the mad guy that invented it, this Cornish lord, said as much right back when he invented it in the 1650s, I think it was. Literally this changes things.
Wow.
And it's going to make brewers millions of pounds because their beer is going to be more efficient. So Dreher and Sedelmeier were waltzing around, visiting all of these breweries. They actually took their lager yeast to a brewery in Scotland. So the first ever lager brewed in the UK was at a small brewery now shut in Scotland. And they also, famously, this is the story people might know, they walked around with a hollow walking stick.
I know this one, yeah.
And they were sneaking samples with their hollow walking sticks.
Very
As if they were
James Bond.
prodding at the mash or something and taking samples to analyse in the hotels. Exactly that. It's like a pump. But so they learned about malting and how to kiln their malts properly. And it's this that they took back in the late 1830s to Germany.
Johnny, are you basically saying that the British turned the Germans into super efficient people?
It's true, yeah. British
society.
efficiency shouldn't be a thing. Might have been at the time if you were a
not
brewery.
anymore.
No.
Wow.
But so yeah, the origin of the pale lager
Yeah.
actually starts in Britain. British pale ales are what started sort of the modern beer revolution.
Yeah.
And it was Sedelmeier Jr. And it was Anton Dreher that brought it over to continental Europe.
Amazing, mind-blowing stuff. I mean, I can't remember the quote, but genius is steel, right?
Is that the quote?
There's something, and then genius, but genius is steel.
Right. Well,
I
definitely
can't remember what the
that.
quote
They did
is.
steal. I think with permission, you know, despite sort of
Yeah,
beery
yeah.
espionage, they did make friends.
I guess at that point, maybe it wasn't like the you know, trade secrets weren't as secret.
Yeah.
Right, because it was all a little bit more mystical.
Yeah.
Although maybe not in England.
And, well, I think also at the time, as the technological revolution, sort of just after the industrial one kicked off, people were very excited to share their methods.
Yeah,
we have in craft brewing today. It's like, yeah, this is how we dry hop. This is the equipment we buy.
Yes.
People wanted to infuse.
It's like a new optimistic time where machines
100%.
and steam and everything was going to like reinvent the world and save us from labour.
Yeah.
And then a couple hundred years later, Johnny, we're still labouring.
Still labouring away. But yeah, I mean, that's a nice link, actually. So Anton Dreher goes back to Vienna and he brews what's called the Vienna Lager using this indirect fire kilning method. And Gabriel Jr. goes back to Spaten and does the same. But instead of creating a new lager, they just tweak their recipe for their Metz and their March beer, which is the beer that's served at Oktoberfest. So this is where we start to get the first people tasting pale-ish lager in the 1841 Oktoberfest.
So Britain helped Germany invent Oktoberfest.
Well, Oktoberfest beer, yeah, definitely. Not Oktoberfest, that was King Ludwig's wedding in 1810.
Wedding. Some sort of wedding.
Yeah. So he goes back, he also buys a steam engine because he's seen these steam engines working in British breweries.
Just for fun. Oh, in the brewery.
Yeah, exactly,
right,
to power the brewery.
Oh,
Sorry,
amazing.
not a locomotive, but an actual steam engine. So he starts to revolutionise the brewery long before he takes it over. Well, not long before he takes it over, because sadly, Gabriel Sedelmeier Sr. dies in 1839. Oh. So he never actually sees the excitement around the release of the Märzen, this sort of, I would say, like amber beer rather than dark brown beer at Oktoberfest.
Can you imagine the excitement that must have caused from people used to like dark, ruddy beers, and then holding something up that was amber and
would have
golden.
shone like bright red through
It would have been
through the glass.
Incredible, right? Like magical experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that is probably the smallest invention and incredible technological feat that Gabriel Jr. creates, because about 35 years later, so he's now a gent.
Quite old.
He's a statesman.
Yeah.
Spaten has grown incredibly. It's now one of the most championed breweries in Germany. But they still have one giant problem. So the problem is the one that's been plaguing brewing and humanity for millennia.
Yes.
And this is the fact that in summer, your beers were more likely to get infected than to ferment happily because the warmer air meant the microbes got in and infected the beer. So what they were doing in Germany, which we have to remember, the local native yeasts were lager yeast. They like to ferment cold. So it's even more likely they'd get infected if they wanted to work at 12, but the temperature was 20, 25 degrees. So what they were doing is they were fermenting their beers in cellars dug underneath the brewery, in the foothills of the Alps, wherever it was. And they were using ice that they harvested in winter to keep those cellars cool. Like an incredible amount of work would go into going to frozen lakes, glaciers, whatever it was.
Wild.
Chipping massive amounts of ice. If anyone's seen the start of Frozen, like that, bringing it back, putting it in the cellars, and that would keep it cold during summer.
And they'd have to do this every year.
Yeah.
Like such a massive industry of just carving ice, chipping ice.
Do you remember when we were in the Spaten cellars and they showed us there was this room that was dark and dingy and kind of rotting brick kind of thing?
Yeah.
And it was huge and tall, and that's where they kept the ice. And
I remember.
It would melt and flow through the brewery.
Wild. Like
huge rooms full of ice. All with the threat that if there's one warm winter, there's not enough ice for the cellars,
no beers.
The breweries, which of course were used for not just beer, for lots of different things that needed refrigerating. Yeah. So Gabriel Sedelmeier, he's sort of reached the size of the brewery that he can achieve, and he realizes that if he can brew all year round, he can increase his volumes, he can get more consistent beer, and he can not worry every winter that there's going to be enough ice. So how do we do that? Nature makes making ice look pretty easy. You wake up one morning, it's icy. but that was beyond human engineering at the time.
Yeah.
But all over the world, well, recently there's been the discovery of how to liquefy gases. And if you cool them down afterwards, you cool down the air. You evaporate them, you cool down the air around. So we discovered that basically by playing around with gases, we could cool down the air around it. And so there was this sort of fermenting idea that we could create some kind of artificial refrigeration. The problem is you're playing with volatile gases. The clue as to why that's dangerous is in the name, volatile, right? So if you think about just trying to do that on a small scale, and people had got badly injured, these brewers who are thinking about this are like, well, we want to basically do this in a cellar that's miles long under a European capital.
So basically, like, potentially make a giant bomb.
Yeah, I mean, like a Jerry Bruckheimer Age of Enlightenment disaster movie.
Wow.
Is what I write in the book. So Gabriel Jr., who is, pretty talented engineer, decides to team up with somebody to solve this problem. So he goes to a man called Carl von Linde, who had been playing around with this technology at the Polytechnic of Munich. And he basically pays Carl von Linde and a bunch of students to come into his cellar and build the first ever sort of closed circuit refrigeration machine.
Wow.
That would generate cold water and, of course, ice for his brewery to cool the wort and for the cellars to cool the fermentations. And Carl von Linde, with money and students and time, comes up with a brand new gas for it, and also these seals made of mercury that would stop the gas leaking, which was a really dangerous thing.
Yeah, okay.
He installs it. It takes years and years. Eventually, 1873, he applies for the patent, starts working, and it leaks.
It what?
It leaks.
Oh, damn.
It works, but it leaks.
Oh, damn.
So he builds a second version at Anton Dreher's brewery in Vienna.
Okay.
He changes to ammonia, and he changes to glycerin seals. Does not leak.
Okay.
And that one was used at Anton Dreher's brewery until 1908.
No way.
So for about 40 years, that worked. And he builds a third version back at Spaten, where it works. And that one that Dreher used was actually part designed by Linde and part designed by Gabriel Jr. himself.
Amazing.
So they've created, for the first ever time, a viable compressed gas fridge.
Yeah.
Which not only changes the game for, obviously, Gabriel Jr., he can brew all year round, but it changes the game for Linde. He retires from teaching. He starts building these machines. He builds like 400 of them. He sells them to Guinness, Carlsberg, all these names that we know, as well as he puts possibly the first air conditioning system into a hotel in Kolkata.
Wow.
He builds ice rinks that are artificially cooled, all this kind of amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And to do that, with his new company, he also he manages to to isolate oxygen, which is used for welding, used for pain killing. He isolates CO2, which is, he does that for Guinness so they can carbonate their beers. So all this incredible stuff with gases. And actually, Linde, his company is now Linde AG, turns over 33 billion, it has like 65,000 employees. It's the biggest gas company in the world now.
Amazing.
And one of his earliest students was a guy called Joseph Diesel, who invented the diesel engine. So the impact of Linde
Not bad, eh?
teaming up with Gabriel Jr. is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Gabriel Jr., obviously his life has changed. He can brew all year round. But he's got more to say. He's got more things to do for the world. So possibly the second biggest thing that he ever did for the world is he gives a gift of his very special now lager yeast.
Yeah.
To J.C. Jacobsen, founder of Carlsberg. And at his laboratory, some of the most important discoveries in microbiology are made.
It's the modern world then.
Yeah, the modern world. And that will be coming at you in a couple of weeks.